All right, so I wanted to try out something a little bit different today. I know usually on this channel I'm doing these big, giant Dropout videos where things are just loud and crazy and all these crazy edits and big video essays and all that, but I, for a few reasons, wanted to try this out today where I just have a Dropout-related topic, something that's just been on my mind that I want to discuss with you guys in just this very casual, kind of podcasty, just one-on-one kind of way. Just got bags of paint and stuff all over my office. Trying to get back into mini painting. That's a video for another day. And the other reason is, be very blatant with you, is I wanted to try to see if I can get one more big flux of viewers on my account, specifically during this next week and a half or so, because the Kickstarter for my new book, Good Morning Apocalypse, is ending very soon. I believe it is the 17th at noon. It is not next Monday, but the following Monday at noon. At midnight, January 1st of the year 2000, the world, as we knew it, shut down. Exactly 1 year later, when the clock struck midnight, something else awoke in its place. Good Morning Apocalypse is a science fiction fantasy novel that explores the world in the aftermath of a true Y2K. Even scarier for the world as we know it, the powers that be were so obsessed with trying to stop whatever this mysterious Y2K phenomenon was, they tapped into a Pandora's box of artificial intelligence far beyond what they ever imagined was actually possible. Our story follows the Caravan, a collected group of survivors from many different walks of life, as they make their way through an apocalyptic Michigan in search of hope. That hope comes in a very strange source, a mysterious radio broadcast called Good Morning Apocalypse. Hosted by a mysterious stranger known only as the Wanderer, the host shares inspiring tales and reminisces about the past, hoping those able to hear him, the Caravan included, will be inspired to fight for a better future. As excited as I am about the book as it stands now, one of the main things we're adding to it right now with this Kickstarter is the thing that I am the most excited for: Brooke's sketchbook. Brooke is a character in Good Morning Apocalypse who happens to be an artist and sketches her way through capturing the beauty of the world. And one of the things we wanted to do with this book is be able to bring that sense of artistic creation to life inside of the book. With the help of the amazingly talented Ted Woods, we are able to create and bring to life this sketchbook, spread throughout the chapters of this book at points where they are thematically and narratively important to see the world from her perspective. Being able to see Ted so brilliantly bring them to life and have them ending up looking truly exactly the way that I pictured them is such an amazing feeling. I think it really does bring a lot to the book and adds so much to the experience of Good Morning Apocalypse. The Kickstarter for Good Morning Apocalypse will run till November 17th at noon. If anything I've talked about in the last couple of minutes excites you at all, I encourage you to look up more information. And you even have the option to read the first full large segment of this book for free on the Kickstarter. Just check out a link located below. I'm a small independent creator. I don't have a giant following behind me. I am not guaranteed any way to make the goal on this Kickstarter. We are not lowballing this. We need all of the help we can get to bring this to life. So, without further ado, here's what I want to talk about. Dropout is growing. It's changing. And I think either for Dropout, for its audience, or for me, I think some growing pains are happening. And kind of want to talk about that. I'm not going to cut this, but if they make an appearance later, that is my cat in the background running around. But Dropout's changing. And so kind of what I mean by that is, like, I think this comes in different forms and different levels. I think at the very beginning, you have the sort of changing as far as these different eras of Dropout that have happened over the years, whether it be the college humor days to the, I think some people cut it off at COVID, but there's definitely a feeling of like the early days of Dropout when it felt like they were kind of doing the college humor stuff, the more scripted things, but just with more money. And then eventually more and more they've switched over to what people have kind of referred to in general as a improv-based network. And I think there's some growing pains of people who have their favorite eras in that. And I think that there's an interest in... We've already seen Dropout change so much before. So it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that it's continuing to change. But in some ways, I am kind of surprised by it. And I'm curious to see how people react to it. I've already seen my reactions to Dropout, or my overall opinions of the platform, change over time. Not in terms of quality, but in terms of quantity. Where in some ways, in growing pains, Dropout has outgrown me. And I mean that purely in the sense that I used to think of Dropout as the platform in which I watch every single video they make and every show that they make and just dive into everything that is Dropout. And at least for me, in my life and how busy things can get and how much content they put out, that isn't feasible for me anymore. And I can't imagine I'm not the only person in that boat. And that affects not only me enjoying Dropout, but that affects fan interactions. For instance, I run a Discord server of mostly Dropout fans, in which I thought, just to keep things fun for myself, I made a specific Cloudward Ho Discord channel with a 24-hour spoiler ban that I thought was for other people's benefit. And then slowly that became to their benefit, as even without losing interest in the show, I felt myself slipping. And once you're a couple of weeks behind, eventually you get to the point where you're like, okay, well maybe I'll just wait for the whole thing to be done, and then something else will happen if I finish that up, and they're like, oh, well, Critical Role Season 4 is happening, and just... Man, the discussion of the amount of actual play to watch, if you're going to keep up on it, is a discussion for itself. But even just in Dropout, watching all of their content has become, at least for me, and I know for some people, impossible. And that's okay. It's not designed for that. Not everything they make is made for everybody. But that kind of leads to my second point here. Not all their content is made for everybody. Things are spreading out. Things are getting more diverse, but not in the way that you might think on Dropout. There is this feeling that the Dropout tent is getting significantly bigger, both in terms of styles of content, but in creators. It's not the super tight-knit group of recurring characters we had at College Humor anymore. And in many ways, it hasn't been like that for a while. But in certain places, we're seeing the floodgates open. I think for a lot of people, and I don't mean this as a negative, but like a lot of this changed, at least for me, when Paul F. Tompkins showed up. I would have to track down the timeline of things. But I think it's possible to say that Paul F. Tompkins was the first big outside star that came in, dipped a toe in Dropout, and then seemingly decided they wanted to stay here for a bit. It would probably either be Paul F. Tompkins or, to not name them all, but the drag queens. There was, there was a floodgate that got opened into bigger audiences and more stars after Dungeons and Drag Queens came out. And I could see it being either one of those being the turning point here. And things have expanded even further, where there's people that, like them, had no previous association with Dropout, weren't like friends of Dropout, that brought more mainstream appeal into the program. And some people like that more than others. There are going to be people that like Dropout the way it used to be. And I can't blame them for that. It's not anything that Dropout did wrong. It's just part of those growing pains. I specifically use that term because I think it's a good way to set it up as something that is less of a cause and effect and more of just an inevitable part of the process. Looking at it broader, this is all kind of part of the thing that Sam Reich has joked about before. This balancing act of wanting to see Dropout get big, but not too big. Like, he's talked in general about his major turning point being that this is just a playground, that he has the opportunity to let these people do the creative things they want to do. That for the most part, the money that they make is to facilitate that process, because it needs to happen. People got to eat, people got to pay bills. And from what I've been told from Sam Reich in different programming, he does do a better job, or his company does a better job of doing that than a lot of other companies do. They pay the best out of pretty much any other people in town by sizable margins. They profit share whenever they're able to. And they've truly changed the lives of a lot of different creators in that way, that they're able to do work like this, where they might not have to do other work, either creatively or non-creatively, that they either didn't want to do or wouldn't be nearly as proud of the work they're doing here. And it would make sense on some logical point that they'd want to expand that option to as many people as possible. But that changes the dynamic. It changes the balance of things drastically. You start to see that with more and more, in some cases, what people consider from some of these outsiders more controversial figures entering into Dropout. For me, I think a lot of this comes in Dropout's welcoming in total of stand-up comedy. Not necessarily all of the Dropout Presents specials, but one can say some of them are a bit harsher, a little bit more all ages, and more of them are in definitely a category of not for everybody. And for some people, the kind of people that want Dropout to be their whole thing, and they want to, in their heads, enjoy everything that Dropout has to offer, that can be a difficult pill to swallow. And that gets more complicated from there when you're talking, not necessarily in terms of what you want to watch, but what you feel comfortable watching. There's a back and forth you see with a lot of Dropout fans, a divide that has been forming with how they approach, for lack of a better term, edgier content. How comedy, depending on who you ask, has different purposes at different times. whether comedy is meant to speak truth to power, if comedy is meant to be escapism, if comedy is meant to be an outlet for creative expression, if comedy is meant to speak power to the powerless. It's complicated. And no one is ever going to be in agreement over what comedian should be pushing one of those things over another at any other period of time. And it's tricky in that way because I can easily see both sides and why either side would be annoyed or in some cases upset at Dropout's decision to take a stand in a certain direction. Some people, for instance, like the fact that for the most part, outside of their website, Dropout seems to have a very place for this and place for that when it comes to their direct social activism. Dropout makes no illusions about who they stand with and who they don't stand with in situations like the war in Gaza or general issues of bigotry, transphobia, homophobia, racism, etc. But while certain comedians do take it upon themselves to add that conversation directly into their own comedy, one for one, where they choose to, that's where the separation lies. And some people like that, and some people don't. You know, there's something to be said for a lot of people where, to be honest, the world's pretty fucking terrible out there right now. A lot of the time. And some people want Dropout to be a place where they can forget about all that and just escape from it all and enjoy some laughs. And then other people, seeing Dropout have power under their platform and the ability to do something with that, think they should do more with it. But the problem there is, as much as I love Dropout, it can be a bit of an echo chamber. It's a tricky thing where a lot of the same people that would have that argument are the same people that think this is why we need to have our small tent. That Dropout should be for our kind of people who believe the way that we believe, but also believe that Dropout should be doing more to make positive change. A lot of that positive change comes in numbers, but those numbers don't show up if we aren't welcoming to people that aren't 100% where we need them to be or want them to be. And I'm not saying that to say that we should be welcoming bigots and horrible people onto the platform. But as a person who has stumbled and continues to stumble, having the wrong opinion or saying the wrong thing over and over again when it comes to social issues, I think that it can be tricky sometimes in the Dropout fandom to know when to extend help to somebody who needs help getting the rest of the way they need to be a part of our community, and to shove away those who would spread poison, for lack of a better term, across it. And as we grow, it gets harder and harder and harder to do. In the same way you see frustrations about Dropout as a company with growing pains. One of the main complaints I've seen lately out of the Dropout community is issues with their storefront, where because of their continued size, they outgrew the smaller, more manageable, and from what I've heard from people, more quality controlled store experience, because they couldn't keep up with the mass of volume they've had to do. They've had to make sacrifices there. But in their minds, I can see where if the only alternative is just that all these people who want to support you just don't get any of those things, then that's kind of where you got to draw that line. And to some degree, I kind of feel like the same way about new voices. I talked about how stand-up was the turning point. Crowd control is what is blowing that wide open right now. Where it is interesting to see comedy portrayed on that show. Mostly, of all of Dropout's shows, Crowd Control has the most total outsiders of any other Dropout program. People coming in who haven't been grown up in Dropout's particular sense of humor. And I see people struggling with that. Because people are being really challenged about what they find funny, what they don't find funny. People on this show in comedy, which is the nature of this medium, not to justify horrible things people say, but as a person who's done stand-up for several years, sometimes you say something that's just not gonna work, and it's either not funny, or you tried to push the envelope and you pushed too far, and that's when you reel back again. And there's a separate conversation about the advent of the internet has changed that so much in some very good and bad ways, either holding people accountable, but also in some points making people fearful to experiment. And I think in general, I'd like to think that as human beings, we can, for the most part, at least with some degree of thought and persistence, tell the difference between someone who has hate in their heart and someone who just said something stupid and then they learn from that and they don't do that again. But more and more I am seeing the dividing point from that Dropout fandom, where you've got these people who want Dropout to maintain this sense of, for lack of a better term, a term that Demi would not like this term, but wholesomeness, and them pushing the envelope again. I even see this in looking at older college humor sketches that you notice that, and I'm assuming it's not because of rights, there are sketches that either only appear on YouTube that aren't on Dropout, or that have been removed from both of them, which is their right to do, because senses of humor change, people grow, people have growing pains. That doesn't just affect the cast as performers playing characters, but affects them as people, which is one of the two biggest things that keep changing about Dropout, not in terms of how big they are, but how old they are. I've been watching Dropout since the college humor days, back a decent amount, which, to give a ballpark of my head, let's say in general, I have been watching Dropout for about 8 years at this point. I'm not the same person I was 8 years ago. I'm not even close, I think, to the same person I was 8 years ago. There's so much that's changed about what I find funny, what I don't find funny, how I understand the world. And In some ways, Dropout has moved with me, and some ways moved away from me. And you see that in the cast of this show. A lot of them, their energy, what they want to do with comedy, where they're at in their lives, has changed and continued to change over all these years. And a lot of this comes off a bit of like a well, duh, but what this all comes together to is the idea that Dropout, in more ways than one, more ways than a few, is growing up. It's getting more daring. It is getting more confident. It is getting more experimental. It is getting edgier. And it is trying to match the ever-changing world. Trying new things, some of which work and some of which don't. But as a whole, I still support them, and I hope that a lot of other people will too. Dropout has done so much for me as a creative. And even just in this small time that I've been doing Dropout content for the last 2 years, that in itself has changed me. And even seeing the way every direction of Dropout has changed in those years just gives me a lot to think about. Dropout's going to keep changing. And I need to ask myself, and I think we all need to ask ourselves, are we okay with that? I feel like we kind of have to be, right? It's just, when you fall in love with something like this, there's going to be times it's going to do things you don't like, you don't agree with. And the more Dropout gets, for lack of a better term, complicated, the harder it's going to be. And you see where I'm going with the double meaning of this. It's getting harder and harder to like everything that Dropout makes. And I think that's just something that's been on my mind. I think I trust Dropout in who they share their community with, in how they are going about this transition into both a bigger and a wider community. But it's been a little rocky at a few points. We're seeing more cracks start to form. And cracks can be fixed, but cracks can lead to more cracks. The idea of a true Dropout controversy seemed wild a few years ago. And now, depending on who you talk to, there's been several, some of which a bit more credible than others. But even in cases where things have gone wrong and Dropout has done, at least in my mind, in a lot of these cases, everything right in fixing the path, for one, not everyone's going to agree with how they fixed some of their controversies or trusts them in how they said they dealt with certain controversies. Or, well, I'm not going to get into it, certain performers at Dropout who, in light of more recent events, I am curious and will take note if they come back again. Because it's already happened before, where there's been people that drop out, has shown a clear sign that they're not, has shown a clear sign that they are not working with them anymore. I have a feeling there may be more than one, especially in light of recent events. We'll have to wait and see. And who knows, maybe some of this is just the internet, you know? Maybe this is just people hate change. And that's all there really is to it. Which is ironic for a show with Game Changer on it, but when I talk about that echo chamber, it really does ring true in some cases, or at least there's a bit of a, there can be a bit of a no true Scotsman fallacy that can form sometimes. I think about the way that people were so angry when Abria Iyengar originally was going to host Misfits and Magic. That from the people who were confused or upset that someone other than Brennan was getting to play, that there's the section of Dropout fans that are out there that we don't like to talk about. Because unfortunately, there's hate in every community. And how we deal with that is tricky sometimes. But it's there. And the larger we get, the larger the platform gets, by pure numbers, just by the way that things work, we can't confidently say we're only going to invite the good people into the tent. At least, not at first. It's always time to get people to leave. But the tent is still growing. The tent is still getting bigger. And I'm curious how this is all going to keep changing. I took too long and my phone ran out of space because I was rambling for way too long. So I'm going to try my best to wrap this up. Dropout is getting bigger. And I am curious to see where it goes. In the way I always am. And that I'm curious to see what new programs they have coming up. And new shows and new ideas and all that. But as the Dropout audience gets bigger. And the cast keeps changing, and the audience keeps changing, and the world keeps changing, it makes me curious where it's all going to end up. I am excited that I get to be part of this journey of watching what Dropout turns into. But every day that goes by, I think about where Dropout was a year ago and the year before that. And there's something about the idea that new things are on Dropout every day. And I think about the fact that I think where I want to end this is with this idea that every single day, this will remain true. That Dropout, as it is right now, will never be the same again. I guess that's just something to think about.